The evening began with champagne bubbles and laughter that sounded as hollow as the clinking glasses. Corporate parties always had this strange theatricality, a sea of strained smiles and overplayed cordiality. Emily thrived in it, though. She wore a sleek black dress that skimmed her figure just enough to leave a lasting impression without seeming overt. Confidence radiated from her like perfume, intoxicating and undeniable. I'd always admired that about her, the way she could walk into a room and make it hers. But tonight, something felt off. Her energy was sharper, edgier, like a live wire sparking for attention. We had arrived together, but the moment the doors opened to the crowd, I might as well have been invisible. She floated away, glass in hand, greeting everyone like a queen surveying her court. I lingered behind, watching her throw back her head in laughter, her hand brushing someone's shoulder here, her fingers lingering there. The smile she wore wasn't for me tonight. Then I saw him, tall, slick, and exuding the kind of smarmy confidence that made my stomach churn. His name was Eric, or maybe Evan. I couldn't remember exactly, but I knew his face. He'd hover around her desk during one of my rare visits to her office, leaning in too close for comfort. At the time, I told myself it was harmless, just workplace banter. But now, seeing him here, the way his hand rested a moment too long on the small of her back as he leaned in to whisper something, my chest tightened. She laughed at whatever he said, her voice louder than necessary, drawing attention. My jaw clenched. It's just a party, I told myself. People drink. They get overly friendly. Emily knew boundaries, or so I wanted to believe. The CEO tapped a glass, calling for attention to make his speech. Something about innovation and teamwork. It was hard to focus with the chaos in my head. My eyes stayed fixed on Emily, who was standing too close to him again. Eric, whatever his name was. They shared a look that made my stomach plummet. When the room erupted in laughter at the CEO's joke, I didn't even crack a smile. My gaze was too busy tracking his hand, the way it casually slid down her arm. It wasn't innocent. It couldn't be. I tried to shake it off, but my feet carried me toward them as if on autopilot. I arrived just in time to hear her giggle, batting at his chest with a playfulness that twisted something deep inside me. "You're terrible," she teased, her voice light and coy. But maybe I like terrible. The words hit me like a slap. It wasn't just what she said. It was the tone, that soft, teasing lilt she used to reserve for me. My fists clenched at my sides as I forced myself to stay calm. Am I interrupting? My voice came out sharper than I intended. Both their heads turned toward me, and Emily's face lit up with exaggerated surprise, like I'd just materialized out of thin air. "Oh, hey, babe," she said too brightly. "This is Eric from marketing." She gestured lazily toward him, her smile thin. "Eric," I repeated flatly, extending a hand. His shake was firm, his smirk infuriating. "Good to meet you," he said smoothly, his eyes flicking to Emily as if I weren't even there. "We were just talking shop." "Shop," I echoed, the word bitter in my mouth. "Yeah," Emily chimed in a little too quickly. "I was telling Eric about that pitch I nailed last week." "You must be proud of her," Eric said, the hint of a challenge in his tone. His gaze lingered, daring me to react. I bit back the retort that burned on my tongue, painfully aware of the eyes around us. As the evening dragged on, her behavior only worsened. She laughed too easily at his jokes, touched his arm as though she'd forgotten I existed, and kept glancing at me with that same dismissive air. By the time dessert was served, my patience had dissolved entirely. When she passed me on her way to the bar, I grabbed her arm. "We need to talk," I said through gritted teeth, my voice low enough not to draw attention. She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of something." "In the middle of what?" I shot back, my tone razor-sharp. "Flirting with Eric? Making me look like a fool?" Her eyes flashed with irritation. "Don't start this here. You're embarrassing yourself," she hissed. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed in her hand. Her expression flickered. Panic, maybe, before she shoved it into her clutch without a word. "What was that?" I demanded, my voice rising despite myself. "None of your business," she snapped, the mask slipping just enough to reveal something colder underneath. I stared at her, stunned, as she plastered on a fake smile and leaned in close. "If you can't handle a little socializing, maybe you should leave." It wasn't just the words. It was the ice in her voice, the contempt that sent a chill down my spine. For the first time, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. My grip loosened, and she sauntered back to Eric without a second glance. I left the party before she did, unable to stomach another second of her performance. In the car, my hands trembled against the steering wheel as I replayed every moment of the night. The laughter, the looks, the dismissal. It all felt like the beginning of something I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. That notification, it wasn't normal. The way she reacted to it, shoving her phone away like it was radioactive. She was hiding something. I felt it in my gut, and I knew I couldn't let it go. When I got home, the house greeted me with an eerie chill. I didn't bother flipping on the lights. Darkness seemed fitting. I collapsed onto the couch, my mind a storm of questions and suspicions. Confronting her the second she walked through the door felt like the logical move. But another part of me, the part one hated, hesitated. What if the truth was worse than I could handle? Minutes dragged into hours. Midnight came and went, and with it, my anger gave way to unease. She'd never stayed out this late after a work event before. The absence of her usual excuses tightened the knot in my chest. Just as I was about to call, my phone buzzed. Her name lit up the screen. "Emily," I said, my voice sharp. "Where are you?" She sounded breezy, too casual. "Hey, I'm on my way home. The party ran late. You okay?" "Love you." Those words, "I love you," stung worse than any insult. How could she say that after humiliating me tonight? After everything I'd seen? "You love me?" I spat, my voice trembling. "You got a hell of a way of showing it, Emily. Flirting with Eric all night, treating me like I was invisible. What's going on with you?" There was a pause, long enough for me to hear faint music in the background. "You're overreacting," she said, her tone clipped. "Eric's just a colleague. You're being paranoid because you're insecure." Insecure. My voice rose, heat flooding my cheeks. "You were all over him, Emily. Everyone saw it. And that message on your phone. What was that? You looked like you'd seen a ghost." Her tone hardened, an edge of frustration cutting through. "Stop it, Jack. I don't have time for this right now." "Then make time," I shouted, the anger bubbling over. "Where are you, Emily? Because you don't sound like someone on their way home." Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her irritation was barely concealed. "I told you. I'm driving home. Calm down before I get there. This is ridiculous." Before I could say another word, she hung up. I stared at the phone, my chest heaving. None of this added up. Her tone, her excuses, it all felt wrong. My fingers hovered over the screen before instinct took over. I opened the Find My app, a feature we'd enabled years ago as a just-in-case. My breath hitched when her location appeared. She wasn't heading home. She wasn't anywhere near the party venue. She was at the edge of town, parked outside a seedy motel. The chill that ran through me wasn't just cold. It was a deep, bone-deep certainty that I didn't want to believe. My head spun with desperate attempts to conjure an innocent explanation, but my gut knew better. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and stormed out the door. The drive blurred into a haze of adrenaline and dread. Gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the dimly lit lot. Her car was there, tucked into a shadowy corner beneath a flickering light. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I scanned the lot. Most of the rooms were dark, save for one near the back, its curtains glowing faintly. I stepped out of the car, my heart thundering in my chest. Every step toward that room felt heavier, like I was wading through quicksand. The faint sound of voices reached me as I got closer, muffled but unmistakable. One of them was hers. The other belonged to him. I froze, the world spinning for a moment. Walking away crossed my mind, pretending I hadn't heard anything, hadn't driven here, hadn't seen her car. But the memory of her dismissal, her lies, and the humiliation she'd piled on me burned too hot to ignore. I knocked on the door, 3 sharp raps that cut through the night. The voices stopped. Then came the sound of hurried shuffling inside. "Room service." I called out, my voice laced with sarcasm. The door cracked open, and there she was, Emily. Her wide eyes were pools of panic, her hair disheveled, her lipstick smeared. She still wore that black dress, but it no longer radiated confidence. Now, it just looked like a costume that didn't fit. "Jack," she stammered, her voice weak. "What are you doing here?" I pushed the door open a little wider. "I could ask you the same thing." Behind her, sprawled on the edge of the bed, was Eric. His shirt hung open, revealing a smugness that made my blood boil. He leaned back like he owned the place, arms folded behind his head, a lazy grin plastered across his face. The sight hit me like a gut punch. My legs wobbled, but I refused to let them buckle. I squared my shoulders and glared at her. "You've got 10 seconds to explain," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Her mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time, she looked truly scared. Good. She should be. Eric didn't even bother moving. If anything, his grin widened, and he looked me up and down like I was nothing. That smirk, the sheer arrogance of it, ignited something in me, a fire I could barely control. "Well," I pressed, stepping into the room despite Emily's weak attempt to block me. "You wanted me to calm down earlier. Let's hear your calm explanation for this." She moved to close the door behind me, but I wasn't giving her the chance. I kicked it shut with enough force to rattle the cheap frame. The sound made Brandon sit up, his smirk faltering for the first time. "This isn't what it looks like," Emily said finally, her voice shaky. A bitter laugh escaped me, one that sounded foreign even to my own ears. "Really? Because it looks like my wife is in a motel room with her coworker at 1 a.m. Please enlighten me. Emily, what exactly does this look like?" Her eyes darted to Brandon, as if silently begging him to step in. But he didn't. He just shrugged, the smirk creeping back onto his face like a stain that wouldn't fade. "We were just talking," he said, his tone so casual it made my blood boil. "Unwinding after the party. No big deal. No big deal." I repeated, each word laced with venom. My gaze snapped back to Emily. "Is that true? You came all the way out here to talk? You couldn't do that at the office? Or, I don't know, at home with your husband?" Her face flushed a deep red as her eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. "I didn't want to wake you," she said weakly. That excuse, so hollow, so absurd, made me laugh again, though this time it was sharp and humorless. "Wake me? Emily, I'm not an idiot. You've been lying to me all night. Hell, probably for weeks. And now you're caught. And this is the best you've got." Brandon stood then, brushing non-existent dust off his slacks like he hadn't a care in the world. "Look, man, I think you're overreacting. Why don't we all just—" "Shut up," I snapped, cutting him off before he could finish. My eyes stayed locked on Emily. "This isn't about you. Not yet." That wiped the smirk off his face. For the first time, he looked unsure. Good. He should be. Emily reached out, her fingers grazing my arm like she thought that could somehow fix things. "Jack, please," she said softly, her voice almost pleading. "Can we just go home and talk about this?" I stepped back, yanking my arm away from her touch. "Talk? Now you want to talk? After everything you've done tonight?" My voice cracked, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "I haven't done anything," she protested, her tone rising in desperation. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "Blowing it out of proportion?" I gestured wildly around the room. "You're in a motel room with Brandon. Emily, this isn't some misunderstanding. This is betrayal. So don't stand there and act like I'm the crazy one." For a moment, something in her facade crumbled. Her shoulders sagged, and guilt flickered across her face. But just as quickly, her defiance returned. She crossed her arms, her lips tightening into a thin line. "Fine," she snapped. "If you're going to accuse me no matter what I say, then what's the point? Believe whatever you want, Jack. I'm tired of justifying myself to you." Her audacity stunned me into silence for a moment. How could she twist this around, make it seem like I was the problem? Before I could respond, Brandon edged toward the door. I'll leave you two to sort this out," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "No," I said sharply, stopping him in his tracks. "You're not going anywhere. Not until I get some answers." He froze, glancing nervously at Emily, who gave him a pleading look. "Brandon, just go," she said, her voice wavering. For once he obeyed. He slipped out the door without another word, leaving us alone. I turned back to Emily. She looked smaller now, like a balloon slowly losing its air. "Why?" I asked, my voice quieter, but no less intense. Why, Emily? What did I do to deserve this? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I don't know, she said finally, her voice barely audible. Maybe I just needed something different. Something exciting. Her words hit me harder than any blow. I staggered back, struggling to breathe. Something different? You mean him? I jabbed a finger toward the door where Brandon had just exited. That's what you're willing to throw away our marriage for? Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't soften me. Not this time. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she whispered, her voice cracking. It just happened. It just happened? I repeated, the words burning in my throat. Emily, you don't accidentally end up in a motel room with someone. You made choices. Deliberate, selfish choices. And now what? You want me to forgive you? Pretend this never happened? I don't know, she said again, the tears spilling over her cheeks. I stared at her, my mind reeling. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't the Emily I thought I knew. She was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize or trust. Finally, I spoke, my voice steadier than I expected. You've made your choices, Emily. Now I'm going to make mine. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. Jack, wait. But I was already walking out the door, leaving her in the ruins of her own making. I didn't go home. Not right away. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the empty streets, the hum of my tires the only sound in the night. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, humiliation, and disbelief. Every time I blinked, I saw her in that motel room, saw Brandon's smug grin, heard her pathetic excuses. The pain was suffocating, and for the first time in a long while I didn't know what came next. Something different, something exciting. The words looped in my mind, twisting the knife in my chest with every replay. Was that what I'd become to her? Something predictable, mundane, disposable? We'd build a life together, layer by layer. The late-night whispers of forever, the shared dreams, the laughter that once filled our home. And she threw it all away for a fleeting thrill. I drove aimlessly, the streets blurring into a hollow stretch of asphalt under my headlights. Somehow, I ended up outside Nate's house. Nate, my best friend, my rock, the guy who'd show up at 3 a.m. with no questions, just solutions. I hated the thought of burdening him, but the idea of going home to an empty house was unbearable. I texted him, "You awake?" The porch light flicked on almost instantly. A moment later, Nate appeared in the doorway, squinting against the chill of the night. He took one look at me, his face softening, and stepped aside without a word. Inside, I collapsed onto his couch, the weight of the night finally catching up to me. Nate handed me a cold beer and sat across from me, his steady presence the only thing keeping me grounded. She cheated, I said, the words heavy and bitter on my tongue. Nate frowned. Amanda. I nodded. With that smug asshole from her office. Brandon. Damn, he muttered, shaking his head as he leaned back. I'm sorry. Mom. What happened? I told him everything. The party, the motel, her pathetic excuses. Nate didn't interrupt, his expression growing darker with every detail. By the time I finished, he exhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair. What are you going to do? He asked, his voice low. I don't know, I admitted, my voice cracking. Part of me wants to blow everything up, make her feel what I'm feeling. But then there's this other part of me. What part? The part that wonders if I could have stopped it, I said, my throat tightening. If I'd been more exciting or attentive or something. Don't go there, Nate said sharply, sitting forward. Don't you dare blame yourself for her choices. She did this, Jack. Not you. I nodded, but his words didn't do much to lift the crushing weight in my chest. I just don't know what to do next. Do I leave her? Fight for the marriage? How do you even begin to trust someone after this? You don't, Nate said bluntly. Not unless she proves she's worth trusting again. And that's not something you figure out tonight. Silence stretched between us, heavy but comforting. The beer in my hand had gone warm by the time Nate offered to let me crash on the couch. I accepted without hesitation. The idea of returning to the house Amanda and I had built together, our home, was unbearable. But sleep didn't come. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling as my thoughts spiraled. Her face in that motel room haunted me. not with guilt or regret, but with annoyance. Like I was the one ruining her night. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the lies or the betrayal. It was about respect. She didn't respect me anymore, if she ever had. The realization hardened something inside me. If she thought I was weak, a man she could manipulate and discard, she was wrong. By the time dawn broke, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin, but it didn't slow me down. I had made a decision. If Amanda wanted a war, she'd get one. And this time, I wouldn't be blindsided. The next morning, I left Nate's place with a plan forming in my head. Fueled by a sleepless night and raw determination, I drove home, rehearsing what I would say. Deep down, I knew words wouldn't matter. Amanda had crossed the line, and now it was time to take control. The house was eerily quiet when I stepped inside. Her car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. I found her in the kitchen, sitting at the counter with a mug of coffee in one hand and her phone in the other, scrolling as if it were any other morning. She looked up when I entered, her expression guarded. "You didn't come home last night." I dropped my keys onto the counter with a metallic clatter, my eyes locking onto hers. "Neither did you. Or have you conveniently forgotten where I found you?" Her jaw tightened, but she didn't respond right away. Instead, she set her phone down and folded her arms across her chest. "Jack, I don't want to fight. I've been thinking about everything, and I think we need to talk." "Talk?" I repeated, a bitter laugh bubbling out before I could stop it. "You had plenty of chances to talk last night, Amanda. But instead, you lied to me, dismissed me, and then ran off to a motel with Brandon. So forgive me if I'm not feeling particularly chatty right now." She flinched at my words, but quickly recovered, her tone taking on a patronizing edge. "I get that you're angry. Angry doesn't even begin to cover it." I interrupted, my voice rising as the emotions boiled over. "You humiliated me, Amanda, in front of your coworkers, at that party, and again when I had to track you down at that disgusting motel. Do you have any idea how that feels?" Her mouth opened as if to reply, but no words came out. "You didn't what?" I snapped, the silence stretching between us like a taut wire about to snap. "You didn't think I'd find out? Didn't care if I did?" Her gaze dropped to the counter, her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, she looked almost ashamed, but the flash of vulnerability was gone as quickly as it came. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't mean for what to happen, Amanda? Ending up in a motel with Brandon wasn't an accident. It was a choice, your choice." Her silence was deafening. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't the Amanda I thought I knew. She was someone else entirely, a stranger who had shattered our life together and left me standing in the wreckage. I took a deep breath, my voice steady but cold. "You've made your choices, Amanda. Now it's time for me to make mine." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "Jack, wait." But I was already walking away, her pleas fading into the background. I wasn't going to crumble under this. Not now. Not ever. I didn't mean to cheat. Didn't mean to destroy our marriage. My voice trembled with controlled rage. "Because from where I'm standing, Amanda, every choice you made was deliberate." She looked away, gripping her coffee mug so tightly her knuckles whitened. "I know I messed up," she whispered, her voice small. "I wasn't thinking straight. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, the bitterness in my voice cutting through the silence. "You actually expect me to believe that? After everything I saw?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. Not this time. I'd seen her cry before, used to deflect, to twist the narrative, to escape accountability. This was different. I wasn't going to let her off the hook. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling, almost inaudible. I don't know what else to say. I stared at her, the woman I'd once loved so deeply, and all I felt was a hollow, aching void. "You think sorry fixes this? Amanda, sorry doesn't even scratch the surface. You've destroyed everything we built together. For what? A cheap thrill?" She didn't respond. Her silence said more than any excuse she could have given. For a moment, the weight of it all threatened to crush me. The betrayal, the lies, the realization that the life I thought we had was a facade. It was too much. Then, like a switch flipping, a cold clarity washed over me. "I'm done," I said, my voice calm, steady. Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her tear-filled eyes. What do you mean? I mean, I'm done letting you control the narrative, I said firmly. Done pretending this marriage is salvageable. You made your choice, Amanda. Now I'm making mine. Eric, wait, she pleaded, standing up, reaching for me with desperation in her voice. We can fix this. I'll do anything, counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Please, just give me a chance to make this right. Her words might have sounded sincere if I hadn't seen her in that motel room. If I hadn't heard her dismiss me, like I was an inconvenience. I gave you chances, Amanda, I said, my tone colder than I thought possible. I gave you 6 years of loyalty, love, and trust, and you threw it away the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you. Her tears spilled over, but I didn't care. They couldn't undo the damage. I walked to the closet, grabbed a duffel bag, and began packing my things. What are you doing? She asked, her voice breaking as she followed me. Leaving, I said simply. I'll figure out the legal stuff later, but for now, I can't stay here. Not with you. Eric, please, she sobbed, trailing me from room to room. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. I stopped in the doorway of our bedroom and turned to face her. I'm not the one who threw it away, Amanda. That was you. Her face crumpled, but I didn't wait for a response. With my bag slung over my shoulder, I walked out the door without looking back. As I drove away, a strange sense of relief began to creep in. The pain was still there, raw and sharp, but beneath it was something else, something faint but steady. Freedom. Amanda had shattered our marriage, but she wouldn't break me. Not completely. By the time I reached Nate's house, I had made a vow to myself. I would rebuild my life, piece by piece, without her. Leaving Amanda wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of action and reflection. I met with an attorney, spent long nights talking with Nate, and sat alone in moments of quiet rage, replaying the scenes in my mind. Her lies, her betrayal, Brandon's smug face. Every memory hardened my resolve. I wasn't just walking away. I needed Amanda and Brandon to understand that actions have consequences. The first step was the attorney. I laid it all out. The affair, the lies, the financial discrepancies. Gather everything, the attorney advised. If this goes to court, you want to be prepared. And prepared I was. Amanda had always handled the bills while I focused on work, but I wasn't naive. I had documentation, expenses that didn't add up, unexplained charges, hotel stays that coincided with her so-called work events. By the time I left that meeting, I had a clear plan. But protecting myself wasn't enough. They needed to feel the fallout. The first strike was professional. I drafted an email to Amanda's boss. Finding their contact info wasn't hard. I'd met enough of her colleagues at office events to know the key players. The message was concise and factual, detailing the affair and their behavior at the corporate party. I didn't demand action. I didn't need to. The weight of the truth and the company's reputation would do the work for me. The second strike was personal. I reached out to Rachel, one of Amanda's closest friends. If anyone could spread the truth, it was her. I wasn't thrilled about airing my dirty laundry, but I knew Rachel would take my side once she heard the full story. Eric, she said when she answered my call, her voice wary. What's going on? Amanda said you left. She didn't tell you why, did she? I asked, my tone sharp. No, Rachel admitted, her hesitation palpable. What happened? And so, I told her. Every detail. The party. The motel. The lies. Rachel listened in stunned silence. And by the time I finished, her loyalty had shifted. That's unbelievable, she said finally, her voice heavy with disbelief. I can't believe she'd do this to you. Believe it, I said, my voice firm. I've got no reason to lie. Rachel promised to confront Amanda, but I didn't care about the fallout in their friendship. I wasn't playing nice anymore. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about taking back control of my life. Amanda had made her choices. Now, it was time for me to make mine. Rachel's voice was measured, cautious. What happened? I laid it all out, every painful detail. She didn't interrupt, just listened. When I finished, the silence on the other end of the line stretched until she let out a low whistle. Wow, she said finally. I knew something was off, but I didn't think she'd stoop this low. She did. I replied, my voice grim. and I need your help." Rachel didn't hesitate. "What do you need?" "I need people to know the truth," I said firmly. "Amanda's out there playing the victim, making it seem like I walked out for no reason. I'm not trying to ruin her life, but I won't let her rewrite history." Rachel's agreement was immediate. "I'll make sure people know what really happened." A grim satisfaction settled over me. Amanda's carefully constructed image was about to crack, and I wasn't going to feel guilty about it. The final blow came when I confronted Brandon directly. It wasn't planned. I ran into him at a coffee shop while waiting to meet with my attorney. He spotted me first, his eyes widening in recognition before darting away. The smugness he'd worn at the motel was gone, replaced with obvious unease. "Brandon," I said, walking to his table. My voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "We need to talk." He shifted uncomfortably. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Too bad," I said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. "You made it my business the moment you decided to get involved with my wife." He glanced around, as if hoping someone might intervene. The cafe was quiet, the conversations around us oblivious. "I don't know what you think happened," he began, but I cut him off. "Don't insult my intelligence," I said sharply. "I know exactly what happened, and so does Amanda's boss." His face paled. "You didn't—" "Oh, I did." I leaned in, my voice low and unyielding. "And if you think I won't take this further, you're wrong. Stay the hell away from me, my life, and whatever's left of Amanda's." I stood, leaving him to stew in his own fear and guilt. As I walked out of the cafe, a weight lifted from my chest. The pain wasn't gone, but this was a start. By the time I returned to Nate's, my phone was already buzzing with messages. Rachel had come through. Word was spreading, and Amanda's web of lies was unraveling. For the first time in days, I allowed myself a faint smile. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but I wasn't on the defensive anymore. The fallout began faster than I expected. The next morning, Amanda's name flashed on my screen. For a moment, I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "What?" I answered flatly. Her voice was frantic. "Eric, what did you do?" "I don't know what you mean," I said, feigning innocence. "Don't play games with me," she snapped. "Rachel's been calling, saying you're spreading lies about me. And my boss," her voice cracked. "He called me in for a meeting tomorrow. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Do you?" I shot back, my anger flaring. "I'm not the one who broke our marriage, Amanda. That was you. All I've done is make sure people know the truth." "The truth," she repeated bitterly. "You're painting me as some kind of monster. It wasn't like that, Eric. You don't understand." "Then explain it to me," I challenged, cutting her off. "Explain what I saw at that motel. Explain why you lied to my face and then called me like nothing was wrong. Make me understand, Amanda." The line went silent, heavy with her hesitation. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, almost childlike. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I laughed, the sound cold and humorless. "But you did, over and over again. So spare me the excuses, Amanda. You made your choices. Now deal with the consequences." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking as I set the phone down. It wasn't long before the texts started flooding in, apologies, accusations, desperate attempts to shift the blame. I ignored them all. For the first time, I felt like I was reclaiming control. Amanda wasn't going to manipulate me again. Later that day, Nate strolled into the living room where I was brooding over my laptop. He tossed a beer onto the coffee table and sank into the chair opposite me. "How's the fallout going?" he asked, his tone casual, though his eyes were sharp. I shrugged. "Amanda's freaking out. Brandon's probably hiding under his desk. It's a mess, but it feels right." Nate nodded approvingly. "Good. They deserve it. But what about you? What's your next move?" The question caught me off guard. For days, my focus had been on exposing Amanda's betrayal, making her and Brandon feel the weight of their actions. But now, with the chaos fully unleashed, I realized I hadn't given much thought to what came next. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I'll figure out the divorce, get my things, maybe look for a new place." "Good," Nate said with a nod. "But don't forget to think about what you want." His words lingered long after he left the room. What did I want? For the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't entirely sure. But I was determined to figure it out. Not just what you're walking away from, but but what you're walking toward. Nate's words stayed with me. They looped in my mind, pulling at something deeper. Revenge had been satisfying, but it wasn't a future. It was a reaction, not a direction. What did I want beyond this mess? That evening, while scrolling through my phone, a message from Rachel popped up. Just heard from Amanda. She's a wreck. Wants to know if you'll meet her to talk things out. I stared at the text, my emotions warring. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave her to drown in her own guilt. But another part, the part still tethered to 6 years of shared memories, wanted answers. Where and when? I typed before I could talk myself out of it. Rachel responded quickly, tomorrow. A park near her office. Neutral ground. The next day, I arrived early, taking a seat on a bench under the sprawling branches of a weathered oak tree. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and for a moment, I let myself breathe it in, pretending I wasn't about to face her. Amanda arrived a few minutes later. She looked worn, pale, her eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. She hesitated when she saw me, then slowly approached, sitting on the edge of the bench as if testing the waters. For a while, neither of us spoke. "Thanks for coming," she said finally, her voice soft, tentative. I didn't respond. My eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "I know you probably hate me," she continued, her voice trembling. "And I don't blame you, but I need you to know that what happened, it wasn't about you." I turned to her, my gaze cold. "Don't give me that cliché, Amanda. Everything you did was about me. Or at least about what you decided I wasn't. Don't sit here and pretend it didn't touch everything we built together." She flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she reached in her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to me. "What's this?" I asked, not taking it. "An apology," she said. I wrote it down because I didn't think I could get through saying it out loud. I hesitated, then took the paper, unfolding it slowly. Her handwriting was neat but shaky, the words tumbling across the page like a confession. It was everything I expected: excuses, regrets, hollow promises to change. But one line stopped me cold. "I didn't know how to tell you I wasn't happy anymore." I looked up at her, my jaw tightening. "So, instead of talking to me, you cheated? That was your solution?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. "Not anymore. I know I handled it wrong," she whispered. "But I loved you, Eric. I still do." Her words hit me like a slap, but not for the reason she intended. They felt hollow, empty, a reflex, not a truth. "No, Amanda," I said, my voice steady. "You don't love me. You love the idea of me. But the moment I didn't fit your fantasy, you didn't hesitate to throw me away." Her tears spilled over, silent and unchecked, but they didn't move me. I stood, the letter crumpled in my fist. "This doesn't change anything," I said firmly. "You made your choices. Now I'm making mine. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Amanda. But it's not me." I turned and walked away, her quiet sobs trailing after me like the last echoes of a broken song. It was over, truly over. And as I left the park, the weight of it all began to lift. It wasn't freedom. Not yet. But it was the first step. Walking away from Amanda was supposed to feel like closure. But as the hours turned into days, I realized closure wasn't what I wanted anymore. Closure implied some neat, tidy ending to an ugly truth, and there was nothing neat about this. Things spiraled quickly for Amanda after our meeting. Rachel kept me updated, not because I asked, but because she seemed intent on making sure I knew how deeply Amanda was unraveling. "She's a mess," Rachel said during one of our calls. "Her boss put her on probation after your email. Apparently, the company has a strict no-fraternization policy, and now everyone in the office knows about her and Brandon." "Good," I said without hesitation. "She deserves it." Rachel paused. "She does. But Eric, I've known Amanda for years, and I've never seen her like this. She's falling apart." I didn't respond right away. A small part of me wanted to pity Amanda, but every time I tried, I remembered her laughter with Brandon, the way she dismissed me like I didn't matter. "Maybe falling apart is what she needs," I said finally. Rachel sighed, but didn't argue. As for Brandon, karma didn't take long to find him. A mutual acquaintance informed me that he'd been transferred to another branch, a polite way of saying he'd been demoted. Apparently, The company decided keeping him in the same office as Amanda was a disaster waiting to happen. While Amanda and Brandon faced the fallout of their choices, I focused on moving forward. The divorce papers were filed, my belongings packed, and I stayed at Nate's while searching for a new place. One evening, Nate and I sat on his back porch, beers in hand, watching the sun sink below the horizon. "So," he said after a long silence, his voice calm but probing. "What's next?" I stared at the fading light, letting his question settle. For so long, I've been focused on exposing the truth, on making Amanda and Brandon feel the weight of their actions. But now, with the chaos settling around me, I realized I didn't have an answer. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "The divorce is in motion. I'll find a new place. Start over, I guess." Nate nodded. "Good. But don't just think about what you're walking away from. Think about what you're walking toward." His words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to think about a future that wasn't defined by anger or betrayal. And for the first time, it felt like hope. "What's next for you?" Nate's question lingered in the air as I took a sip of my beer, letting the words settle. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I just start over." Nate nodded thoughtfully. "Not a bad idea. Clean slate and all that." "Yeah," I said, though the thought of starting over felt both liberating and terrifying. As the days turned into weeks, I began piecing my life back together. I found a small apartment across town, a modest place, but it felt like mine. Work became my focus, a steady anchor in the chaos. I threw myself into hobbies I'd neglected for years, rediscovering old passions. And I leaned on friends like Nate and Rachel, who reminded me daily that I wasn't alone in this. But even as I moved forward, Amanda's shadow lingered. One night, as I was settling into my new place, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, a message from Amanda. "I'm sorry for everything. I know I've lost you, but I hope one day you'll find it in your heart to forgive me." I stared at the message, emotions swirling, anger, sadness, and something harder to define. Forgiveness felt impossible. Maybe one day, I thought, but not now. Not yet. I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone down and stepped out onto my balcony. The cool night air wrapped around me, carrying the faint hum of city life. For the first time in months, I took a deep breath and felt a flicker of peace. Amanda's choices had shattered what we'd built, but they hadn't shattered me. I was still standing. And for now, that was enough. Weeks turned into a month. The chaos Amanda had unleashed in my life began to fade, like a distant storm rumbling on the horizon. I settled into my new apartment, found solace in a routine, and even started meeting new people. Nothing serious, just casual conversations, shared laughter that reminded me there was life beyond betrayal. But just as I started to feel normal again, a message pulled me back toward the storm. It was a random Thursday evening, and I just finished dinner when my phone buzzed. I picked it up, expecting a text from Nate or a work notification. Instead, it was from an unfamiliar number. "Hey, Eric, it's Brandon. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but we need to talk. Please." For a moment, I thought it was a joke. Why the hell would Brandon, of all people, reach out to me? What could he possibly have to say that I'd want to hear? My anger flared, instinct screaming at me to delete the message and move on. But something stopped me. Curiosity, maybe, or the nagging suspicion that there was more to the story. After a long pause, I typed a short reply. "What do you want?" The response came almost immediately. "Can we meet?" "It's about Amanda." My pulse quickened. What could he possibly tell me about Amanda that I didn't already know? I almost said no, but then I thought about all the lies, the hidden truths Amanda had spun. "Fine," he replied. "Tomorrow. Noon. Coffee shop on Main." The next day, I arrived early, choosing a table in the back where we wouldn't be overheard. The cafe was quiet, the smell of freshly brewed coffee thick in the air. I sat with my arms crossed, watching the door. Brandon walked in a few minutes later, his usual smugness replaced with unease. He looked smaller somehow, weighed down by something heavier than guilt. Spotting me, he hesitated before cautiously making his way to the table. "Eric," he said, his voice hesitant. "Thanks for meeting me." I didn't respond, just gestured for him to sit. He slid into the chair across from me, fidgeting with his coffee cup. The tension between us was palpable, Heavy. Get to the point. I said finally, my tone cold. He nodded, swallowing hard. I know I screwed up, he began, his voice low. I never should have gotten involved with Amanda. It was wrong, and I regret it. But there's something you need to know. I leaned back, crossing my arms. I'm listening. Brandon glanced around nervously, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. She's been lying to both of us. My eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? She told me you two were already separated when we started, he said, his voice tight. You know, she made it seem like your marriage was over, that you were just staying together for convenience or appearances. Anger flared in my chest, sharp and sudden. My jaw tightened. That's bullshit, and you know it. I know that now, Brandon said quickly, his words rushing out. But at the time, I believed her. She told me you were controlling, that you didn't care about her anymore. She said she was just waiting for the right time to leave. His words hit me like a gut punch, but I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. And you didn't think to question any of that? He looked down, shame flickering across his face. I was an idiot, he admitted. I wanted to believe her, because it made what we were doing seem less wrong. I stared at him, my emotions warring. On one hand, I wanted to throttle him for being so gullible, for letting Amanda manipulate him so easily. But on the other hand, his story fit. It was just like her, rewriting the narrative to suit her needs, twisting reality to absolve herself of blame. What do you want from me? I asked finally. Brandon looked up, his eyes desperate. I need you to know I'm sorry. For everything. I believed her lies. And it wasn't until everything blew up that I realized the damage I'd caused. I didn't reply immediately. Part of me wanted to lash out, to unload all the anger I'd been holding on to. But another part of me, the part that was ready to move on, felt nothing but exhaustion. Is that it? I asked, my voice flat. Brandon nodded. Yeah, that's it. I stood, tossing a few bills onto the table for my coffee. Then we're done here. He didn't try to stop me as I walked away, the weight of his regret hanging in the air behind me. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to look back. Whatever Brandon thought he owed me, I wasn't interested in collecting. My focus was on the future. And for the first time, it felt like it was finally within reach. Amanda had always been a master at spinning narratives, at feeding people the version of the truth they wanted to hear. There's more, Brandon said, his voice pulling me out of my thoughts. I raised an eyebrow. More? He nodded, his expression grim. After you confronted us, she told me to stay away from her. Said it was over between us. But then she started reaching out again. Late night texts, calls. She said she needed someone to talk to, that she was struggling. I told her I didn't want to get involved again, but you did, I said flatly. He winced, shame etched into his features. Yeah, she showed up at my apartment a few nights ago. She was drunk, crying about how she'd ruined everything. I let her in, and we talked. But it was weird. Weird how? I asked, my voice hard. Brandon hesitated before leaning forward, lowering his voice. She kept talking about you, about how you'd moved on, how you didn't even seem hurt anymore. It was like she couldn't stand the idea of you being okay without her. A chill ran down my spine at his words. She's not letting go, Eric, Brandon continued, his voice serious. I think she's spiraling. And honestly, I don't know what she's capable of anymore. I stared at him, my thoughts racing. Amanda's behavior had been erratic lately, but I chalked it up to guilt and the consequences of her choices. Now, I wasn't so sure. I don't trust you, I said finally, my tone cutting. But I'll keep this in mind. Brandon nodded, seeming to accept my distrust. I get it. Just be careful. She's not who you think she is. He stood and left, leaving me alone at the table with a storm of thoughts swirling in my head. As I walked out of the coffee shop, one thing became clear. Amanda wasn't just struggling to accept the end of our marriage. She was unraveling in ways I hadn't anticipated. Whatever came next, I had to be ready for it. The following week passed uneventfully, like the calm before a storm. I tried to push Brandon's warnings out of my mind, but they lingered like a shadow. Amanda hadn't reached out since our meeting in the park, but the uneasy feeling that she wasn't done haunted me. That feeling was confirmed on a quiet Saturday evening. I was sitting in my living room, watching TV, when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text from Amanda. We need to talk. It's important. Please. My stomach churned as I read the words. The last thing I wanted was another confrontation, but something about the message felt different. Urgent. What do you want, Amanda? I typed back, already bracing myself for the worst. Her response came almost immediately. I'm outside. I froze. My heart pounded as I walked to the window and pulled back the blinds. Sure enough, her car was parked at the curb, and she stood beside it, arms wrapped around herself like she was shielding against the cold. For a moment, I considered ignoring her. But the look on her face, haunted, desperate, made me pause. With a sigh, I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. What are you doing here? I asked, keeping my distance. Amanda's eyes were red, her makeup smudged as if she'd been crying. I had to see you, she said, her voice trembling. This isn't the time, Amanda, I said firmly. We've already said everything that needs to be said. No, we haven't, she said, her tone rising. You don't understand, Eric. I'm falling apart. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I feel like I'm losing my mind. That's not my problem anymore, I said coldly. Her face crumpled, and she took a hesitant step closer. Please, just listen to me. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But I still love you, Eric. I never stopped loving you. The words cut through the night like a dagger, but they no longer had the power they once would have. You still here? Unblinking. You don't get to say that, I said quietly. Not after what you did. Tears streamed down her face. I was stupid, she said, her voice cracking. I let my insecurities get the better of me. I thought Brandon would fill some void, but he didn't. He made everything worse. And now I'm standing here, begging you to forgive me because I don't know how to move on without you. Her honesty was disarming, but it didn't change the reality of what had happened. I don't owe you forgiveness, I said sharply. You didn't just hurt me, Amanda. You destroyed us. And now that you're finally feeling the consequences, you want me to fix it? That's not how this works. She sobbed openly, her tears soaking the chill night air. Eric, please, she whispered. Just tell me what to do. Tell me how to make this right. You can't, I said simply. Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, I thought she might finally leave. But then, to my surprise, she straightened, her expression hardening. You think you're so perfect, she said bitterly. Like you didn't play a part in this. I blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift. What the hell are you talking about? You were distant, she spat, anger cracking through her voice. Always working, always focused on everything but me. Do you have any idea how lonely I felt? How invisible? Her words stung, but I didn't let her see it. Instead, I laughed bitterly. That's rich, I said, the venom clear in my tone. You had every opportunity to tell me how you felt, I said, my voice steady sharp. But instead you lied. You cheated. You threw our marriage away. Amanda's face twisted, a storm of anger and frustration flashing across her features. But she didn't respond. Instead, she turned abruptly, her heels clicking against the pavement as she stormed back to her car. She climbed in, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the quiet night. As she rolled down the window, her voice rang out, sharp and cutting. You'll regret this, Eric. You'll see. Her words echoed in the still air as she sped off, taillights fading into the darkness. I stood there for a moment, the chill biting in my skin, letting her parting shot hang in the night. Anger flared briefly, but it was overshadowed by an overwhelming sense of relief. Walking back inside, I realized something I hadn't fully grasped before. Amanda wasn't fighting to save our marriage. She was fighting to save the version of herself that existed in my eyes, the version she had destroyed. But that version of her was gone, irreparably shattered by her choices. And no amount of begging, blaming, or empty promises could bring it back. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a profound sense of finality. Amanda's chapter in my life was over. Whatever came next, it wouldn't include her. I locked the door behind me, shutting out the night and everything it carried. Turning off the lights, I climbed into bed, exhaustion tugging at me. But this time, it wasn't the exhaustion of emotional turmoil. It was the kind that comes from facing the truth head-on. As I lay there, I allowed myself one final thought. The future was finally mine to shape. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt ready to face it.